Today with me in this interview is Henry Raymond, who works as a property solutions advisor in North Manchester. Good morning, Henry Raymond. I'm glad to invite you to this interview session. I will give you a brief introduction on the topic. As you know, fake news or information is false or misleading information presented as news. Fake news stories created to deliberately misinform or deceive release. Usually, these stories are created to either influence people's view, push a political agenda, or cause confusion, and can often to be a profitable business for online publishers. Fake news can deceive people by looking like a trusted website or using similar names and addresses to a reputable news organizations. My first question for you is, in your opinion, what is fake news? Do you think it is different from misinformation and disinformation? And can you explain why?
In my opinion, fake news is when something is fabricated to achieve a certain type of agenda or a thought process in, I would say, predominantly groups of people or communities or masses of people. Also, I think misinformation is different from disinformation in the respect that misinformation can be something that is contrived, that has been put together or brought together by somebody in some ways to either achieve a goal for themselves or to denigrate another party. Disinformation, I feel quite strongly, is where openly information regarding whatever's going on in the world has been duped in some way.
How you will spot a fake news? In your opinion, what are the things a person should do when a fake news is identified?
Well, first of all, I think spotting fake news means that you have to go into different channels of communication or information. So, for example, social media compared to the standard tabloids and also compared to television webcasts. And I think once you are able to take a collective amount of information, you're able to generate some sort of idea of what is real and what is fake. In that respect, I would say that when fake news, I identify fake news personally when I read it or I see it, I will then go on to different channels to make sure that what I'm reading is true or unique in what is trying to be portrayed.
Now, fake news has increased with the recent rise of social media, especially the Facebook newsfeed, and this misinformation is gradually seeping into the mainstream media. Do you agree, and what are your thoughts about it?
I don't wholly agree, but what you are now seeing is that very large social media outlets are controlling the media that's going into their channels and then therefore banning or securing or ending some people's information that is put online. I think it's a positive thing to have social media as a separate counter to what we see as the mainstream. And that's extremely, extremely important. And if we do not have that, even as a check, it tends to denigrate a lot of issues. And I think one of the main issues that we've seen is, for example, in the United States, the Senate and congressmen actually putting now potentially a ban on TikTok, because fundamentally channels like TikTok or Twitter have allowed for news to seep through. But it's also educated people to know actually what is legitimate and what is not legitimate. That has also been a very positive thing.
From your viewpoint, what are the major problems created by fake news? Do you think more best practices and adaptation of journalism training is important for news journalists for enhancing their knowledge on how to overcome the fake news issue in future?
Well, the major problems with fake news is actually, again, political and massively financial news agencies and bodies that are able to control both political agendas as well as economic agendas. And I think that is a major issue. That will not stop unless arbitrarily something like fake news is allowed to seep in and to see exactly what is legitimate. I mean, what's interesting now is that we're seeing very much mainstream journalists going into social media channels, and they're being highly respected in what they're saying. But then you see, even from what they're saying, if anything may seem as if it's being contrived, can be searched out, and the sources and the information we have can be deemed as something that may be a little bit more positive. I think with that knowledge that journalists have right now, if they can work in different platforms and acutely put out information which is genuine, then yes, they would hold a lot more esteem. But like I said, you're not going to beat the likes of Murdoch or News Corp in this respect. Unfortunately, they are the ones that dominate the news agendas around the world.
One last question. What are the some of the suggestions you for the young aspirants to become a successful journalist rather than becoming a detective? And what are your recommendations for spotting fake news which is not truthworthy and reliable?
Personally, I think if I saw, or I do read a lot of young journalists, and I tend to find that morally and aesthetically they have far more integrity in what they want to report. And I think the younger movement of people right now are the ones that are holding a lot more older, sustained journalists in there, and actually putting them to account. And I think that's incredibly important, because what you would see then is, moralistically, is a movement that is willing to question a huge, large body or corporation in what they're putting out there. But the most fundamental one is going to be about the news agenda that's been set by what's going on in Israel and Palestine. That has allowed us to, for the first time, to understand the difference between what is legitimate and non-legitimate. And a young journalistic movement that's moving forward has also seen people that are in other professions all of a sudden start to become newsreaders, or acutely making people aware of anything that's out there in the press. Fundamentally is because you are seeing people who very strongly believe in the ethics of humanity and people. So we are seeing potentially our first genocide live, and that is not dividing opinion anymore. Unfortunately, journalists are being tested in what's being put out there. So if who's trustworthy and reliable? Well, I spent my whole life listening to the BBC. And I can honestly say that the agenda that's been put out by them has been extremely disappointing. But then when I'm seeing journalists that are ex-BBC journalists and their integrity being held up, and they're going onto different platforms and reporting something different, then I can actually have hope that at the end of the day, I think the public are being re-engineered in their thoughts, in their minds, in the way they think about the world, and in the way that they see information and how that disinformation works.